In a large modern city in the East lived a man named Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson was an extremely wealthy man who had a very large house and very beautiful cars. He was the father of 2 young girls. The oldest girl was named Stella, and she was the daughter he had with his late first wife. The second girl was named Grace, and she was the one he had with his current wife. Mr. Johnson loved his second daughter Grace very much and spent most of his time with her. He was always there for her and gave her everything she asked for. He never refused any of her requests, even if he had to spend millions. On the other hand, he hated his first daughter Stella and never gave her any gifts. When she dared to ask him for something, he told her to work hard to earn her own money to buy herself everything she wanted. Stella lived in a family where no one paid attention to her. She spent her days cleaning the house, doing domestic chores, and sometimes she ate nothing the entire day. Meanwhile, Grace, who was the youngest, lived a life beyond her age. She was a spoiled girl. She spent her father's money without thinking, went out late at night, hung out with boys of questionable behavior, and constantly partied. One evening, while Stella was still at home taking care of her final household chores as usual, Grace was once again in an illegal nightclub banned by the city authorities. She was smoking cigarettes and substances prohibited by the police with a group of boys. She was dancing, jumping, and shouting when suddenly the local police surrounded the nightclub. Some men managed to run away quickly from the nightclub. Having no time to react, she was arrested and taken into the police car with the people who were causing trouble with her. That same night, her father, Mr. Johnson, was informed that she had been arrested. He was lost. He began to think about how to save his daughter. He decided to meet with one of the officers to see if he could bribe him so that his daughter would be released. He quickly took his car and went to the police station that same night. He asked the officer what he could do to get his daughter released. The officer knew that Mr. Johnson was extremely rich. He knew he should take advantage of the opportunity to extract as much money as possible from him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, but we can no longer release your daughter so easily because her name is already registered in the police record. And if I find someone to replace her, could you help me? If you find someone, I can discreetly change the name in the register, but you have to give at least $10,000 because it's very risky for me, and I could lose my job because of it. Money is not a problem for me, officer. I can even pay you double what you asked. The most important thing for me is that my daughter is released. But who will replace her, Mr. Johnson? I have another daughter who will take her place. Don't worry about that." He stood up and left the office looking satisfied with his deal. All that remained was to convince his daughter Stella to take Grace's place in prison, and he already knew how to do it. Once he got home, he called his daughter Stella to the table. "My dear daughter, we need to talk about something very important. You know your little sister has been sent to prison, don't you?" "Yes, Dad." "You also know she's far too young to go to prison, don't you?" "Yes, Dad," replied Stella. "I want you to take her place as the big sister. And to thank you, I will enroll you in university like you've always wanted. I will also start taking care of you and cherishing you like I usually do with your little sister. But above all, don't think that I will abandon you in prison. When you're there, I will do everything in my power to get you released as quickly as possible." Stella was shocked by her father's words. She had always wanted to continue her university studies and had always dreamed of being loved by her father and cherished like her little sister. Moreover, her father had promised to help her get out as quickly as possible. For her, it was an opportunity to seize. But unfortunately, she still didn't know what truly awaited her. If you're really going to do everything you can to get me out as soon as possible, then I'm ready to sacrifice myself for my little sister, Dad." Mr. Johnson held her tightly in his arms for the first time to make her believe that he truly wanted to change. The next morning, Grace was released from prison. Mr. Johnson was very happy to have perfectly executed his plan. He was very happy to see his daughter again. Money can really do anything, he thought to himself. Once in the prison cell, Stella found herself with an old woman named Mrs. Charlotte. She often had fainting spells and seizures in the cell due to the heat. Every time it happened, Stella fanned her to help her regain consciousness. She took care of her as if she had known her for a long time. Every Saturday, a young man named Daniel visited the woman. He was her son. He was very handsome, and his charm did not leave Stella indifferent. Every time he came to see Mrs. Charlotte, Stella watched him. She had fallen under his charm, but she was content just to look at him, never daring to say anything. She thought he would surely see her as a bad girl since she was in prison. So she didn't dare speak to him. Despite her closeness with Mrs. Charlotte, she never told her either. In fact, Mrs. Charlotte was in prison unjustly. She had been falsely accused of killing her husband, and for years, despite her son's efforts to prove her innocence, nothing had worked. She had been alone in the prison cell before Stella arrived. Stella's arrival was a great blessing for her because she kept her company and took care of her during her seizures. She took care of her as if she were her own mother. One day, while the two were talking, Mrs. Charlotte asked her why she had been sentenced to prison. Stella explained that she was in prison to take her sister's place and had committed no crime herself. Mrs. Charlotte was very moved by her story. She promised to help her get out when she was free. "I will finish my sentence in exactly 3 weeks. As soon as I am released, I will do everything in my power to help you get out too." Stella was very happy. She hugged Mrs. Charlotte. A few days later, Stella was sleeping in the cell when a policeman came to wake her up. "Your father just arrived and wants to see you." She was very happy to hear the news. Since she had been in prison, he had never come, and she no longer thought he ever would. Unfortunately, Mr. Johnson had come with a very specific purpose. Stella rushed to throw herself into her father's arms, but he pushed her away with a wave of his hand. "Step back first, please. You really smell bad," her father said harshly. In reality, Mr. Johnson had come only with the sole aim of convincing Stella to accept yet another proposal. He had major financial problems, and the company that made him the rich man he was on the brink of bankruptcy. He had sought the help of a billionaire to save his company. The latter had accepted but imposed 2 conditions. The first condition was that Mr. Johnson find him a girl for a one-night stand. The second condition was that Mr. Johnson give him his daughter Grace in marriage. Mr. Johnson was forced to accept his request to save his company. Unable to find a girl to make such a bold request to, he decided to go ask his own daughter. That was the only reason he had come to see Stella in prison. He wanted her to have sexual relations with the man to save his company. Stella was still a virgin. She had always wanted to stay true to herself and preserve herself until marriage. She could not accept such a request because she held firmly to her virginity. She categorically refused her father's request, but he was determined to make her change her mind. "If you really want to get out of prison, you absolutely have to do what I ask, Stella. It's the only thing that will allow me to free you. If you don't do it, I won't be able to do anything for you anymore." Stella was lost. She didn't want to spend her whole life in prison. Back against the wall, she finally accepted her father's proposal against her will. Mr. Johnson went to see the chief officer and slipped him some bills so he would let her quietly out of prison that evening. That evening, a driver arrived with a very luxurious car and picked up Stella, who had changed her clothes. He drove her to the hotel. When she entered the living room, a great fear and coldness filled her entire body. The room was very dark and the lights were off. The man approached her and dragged her to the bedroom. He had taken care to turn off all the lights so Stella wouldn't be able to recognize him because he was a very rich and influential man. He ordered Stella to take off her clothes and lie down on the bed. She obeyed and lay down on the bed in tears. It was dark and the man didn't know she was crying. She lay down on the bed and the man took advantage of her naivety. She had just lost what was most precious to her, her virginity. And the worst part was that she couldn't even see the face of the person she was dealing with. After the act, the driver who had brought her to the hotel took her back to prison. As for the man, he spent the night in the hotel room. Once back in the cell, while Mrs. Charlotte was sleeping, Stella was crying. Her father was the only person she had left, but every time she trusted him, she always ended up alone in difficulties. The next day, as soon as the man who had had relations with Stella woke up, he noticed there were bloodstains on the bedsheet. He was shocked. He didn't know the girl he had been with was still a virgin. He thought she was just a prostitute. As soon as he realized he had taken the virginity of an innocent girl, he was troubled and began to feel guilty. He quickly left the hotel, his heart broken. As for Stella, she was no longer the joyful and hopeful girl she once was. She struggled to accept what she had just experienced. She became more and more sad and distant. Noticing this, Mrs. Charlotte approached her and asked why she was becoming so quiet and withdrawn. Every time she asked, Stella replied that she was just a little sad to be in prison. Mrs. Charlotte promised to help her get out once she was released. It had now been 2 weeks since Stella had done what her father had asked her. But since then, her father had never come back to see her. She was still in prison and felt abandoned and betrayed. She slowly realized that her father had used her once again. Meanwhile, he was already showing wedding dresses to his daughter Grace to prepare her marriage to the billionaire businessman. Grace was very happy. She knew she would live with a very rich man, and that was what she had always wished for. A few days later, it was the date when Mrs. Charlotte was to be released. She had finished serving her sentence and could now freely return home. Stella was very sad and cried. She wished Mrs. Charlotte to regain her freedom, but she cried because she would now be left all alone. Mrs. Charlotte comforted her. "Don't worry, Stella. I promise I'll do everything I can to get you out." Before leaving with her son Daniel, she gave her the address of her house. Once home, Mrs. Charlotte asked her son Daniel to help Stella get out of prison. "This girl helped me a lot in prison, Daniel. I really want you to do something to help her get out, especially since she's innocent." Daniel immediately went to the police station and went straight to see the chief commander. He explained Stella's situation to him. A week later, Stella was released. As soon as she got out of prison, she went straight home to announce the good news to her father. Mr. Johnson was eating at the table with Grace when suddenly Stella appeared, shouting happily, "Dad! Grace! I've been released!" She was still wearing her prison outfit, which was dirty, faded, and stinking. Mr. Johnson asked her with a disgusted look, "What happened? Did you run away?" "No, Dad. The lady who was in the same cell as me was released, and she helped me get out too." Mr. Johnson looked at her again with disgust. "Please get out of my living room. "I don't want to see you here," he said without remorse. Stella was confused. It was as if the world had just collapsed on her. How could someone who was supposed to be her father say such a thing to her? She started crying. What did I do for my own father to hate me so much? She had always respected and obeyed him, and always did everything he asked of her. She left the house. She sat under a tree and began to cry desperately. She didn't know where to go. She had no relatives or friends. She kept crying when she suddenly remembered Mrs. Charlotte. She had given her her address. She got up suddenly as if she had gained a burst of strength. She decided to go to her house to ask her for help. She walked for a few hours and arrived in front of a large house. She stepped forward to enter, but a guard was at the entrance and stopped her because of the state she was in and her unbearable body odor. "Please, sir, let me in," she pleaded. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you can't enter here in this condition." She turned around sadly to leave when she saw a car in the distance coming toward the house. It was Daniel, Mrs. Charlotte's son's car. "Are you looking for someone, miss?" "I want to see Mrs. Charlotte, please," she replied, as a glimmer of hope lit up her heart. Given the condition she was in, Daniel didn't want to let her into the house either. "Don't worry. You don't need to thank her. I'll do it for you." Stella knew this was her last hope, and that if she didn't manage to get in, she might sleep on the street. She knelt on the ground and began to beg him in tears. He felt embarrassed and was forced to let her in. As soon as she set foot in the house, she was shocked by the luxury and size of the home. She looked all around her when Mrs. Charlotte shouted her name from the terrace. She quickly went to greet her. Mrs. Charlotte led her inside. She was speechless. She had never imagined that Mrs. Charlotte was rich. She had always believed she was a poor woman because never in prison did she complain about anything, and she was always very humble and kind. Once at the table with Mrs. Charlotte, Stella began to compliment her on her beautiful house, but she didn't like to talk much about her wealth. She tried to change the subject by asking her what she would like to eat. She replied that she would take any food. Mrs. Charlotte went to ask her cook to prepare something for her. She then returned to the living room and turned to her again. "So, Stella, did you already return home to see your family?" It was at that moment that she remembered the main reason why she had come to see Mrs. Charlotte, and her face instantly filled with pain. She replied sadly while fighting back her tears. "Yes, I went back home, ma'am, but my father sent me away and told me he didn't want to see me anymore. That's why I came to see you. I wanted to ask if I could work for you as a housemaid, so I could live with you while I look for a solution." Filled with compassion, Mrs. Charlotte didn't hesitate to let her good heart speak. "You can stay in my house as long as you want, Stella. You helped me a lot while I was in prison. It's the least I can do to thank you. I'm not just going to live in your house and take advantage of your possessions, ma'am. I really want to work for you, and when I've saved up some money, I can go settle elsewhere." Mrs. Charlotte knew she had to help her. She then agreed to employ her as her housemaid. The next morning, very early, Stella was already cleaning. She was already used to doing everything on her own since she had lived with her father. Mrs. Charlotte noticed that she only had one outfit, and it was the same outfit she wore in prison. She took her to a shop and bought her plenty of new clothes. She lacked nothing. In the evening, Daniel came home from work and rang the doorbell. Stella quickly went to open the door for him. "Welcome, sir." As soon as Daniel entered, he was surprised to see how beautiful Stella was. She was wearing a lovely tight black skirt that highlighted all her physical assets. She was stunning, and Daniel had never seen her like that. He asked her what she was still doing in the house, and why she was the one who had opened the door for him. Stella explained that his mother had employed her to work as a housemaid in the house. Daniel hurried into the living room and went to his mother. He asked her why she had employed Stella when she knew nothing about her family. Mrs. Charlotte explained that he had nothing to worry about. I had time to observe this girl's behavior when I was in prison, and I came to know her as someone very respectful and kind. Don't worry, she can stay here. Daniel had great respect for his mother and decided to trust her. The next day, while Stella was sweeping the courtyard, someone rang at the gate. She went to open it, and the person introduced himself as Mrs. Charlotte's personal doctor. Stella let him in, and he went straight to see Mrs. Charlotte in the living room. I came with bad news, Mrs. Unfortunately, the tests we conducted revealed that your kidney is not compatible with your son's. In fact, Mrs. Charlotte had suffered from kidney disease for a long time, and this illness was the reason she often had fainting spells and seizures in prison. She had one defective kidney and only one remaining, which was also in poor condition. Her son Daniel wanted to donate one of his kidneys to her, but unfortunately, the doctor had just informed him that there was a compatibility issue. She was very sad to hear this news, but she told herself deep inside that if she were ever called to die, Stella would take care of her son. She trusted her and even wished for her to become his wife. As for Daniel, he was very disappointed by this news. He realized that his mother could die at any moment, and fully aware of the stakes, he decided to fight harder to find her a donor. He felt guilty for not having spent much time with his mother due to his very busy schedule. Later that same day, Daniel informed Stella about Mrs. Charlotte's condition. Without thinking twice, she offered to donate one of her kidneys to save Mrs. Charlotte. Daniel was surprised by Stella's spontaneous offer. He was astonished by her kindness. This girl is not only beautiful, but also very kind, he thought to himself. He was very happy and immediately took Stella to the hospital to carry out tests to see if her kidney could be transplanted to Mrs. Charlotte. After some blood analyses, the doctor told Daniel that unfortunately, Stella's kidney also could not be transplanted to Mrs. Charlotte. Daniel burst into tears. He was disappointed. He no longer knew what to do or who to turn to in order to find a kidney for his mother. He returned home with Stella to announce the bad news to his mother. "I'm really sorry, Mom, but the test was negative. Stella's kidney is not compatible either. The doctor said that if we don't find a kidney as soon as possible, you could die. I'm really sorry, Mom. Don't worry, my son. Anyway, we're all destined to die someday. Don't say that, Mom. I will keep searching. Don't lose hope. Listen, my son, I have an important request to make. I want you to promise me that you will marry Stella and take good care of her if I ever lose my life. It's the only thing that matters most to me, and that I must tell you before I die." Stella was standing in the room next door and overheard their conversation. She was shocked by what she heard. Daniel immediately refused his mother's request. He found Stella very beautiful, but he could not accept taking a housemaid as a wife. But Mrs. Charlotte was very determined to make him change his mind. "Listen, my son, as long as you don't promise me to marry Stella, even if you manage to find me a kidney, I won't agree to have the operation." Daniel was lost. He had always done everything to make his mother happy, but this time what she was asking was too difficult for him. He remained silent for several minutes, thinking. His mother's life meant a lot to him. She was the only person he had left. "All right, listen, Mom, I'll do it. If that's what I have to do to make you happy, I'll do it." The next day after work, he came home with a paper in hand that he handed to Stella and asked her to sign. She took the paper, and after reading it, she realized it was a marriage contract. She quickly signed it, trying to hide her joy. She had always been in love with Daniel since she was in prison, even though she had always tried not to show her feelings. Her joy was so overwhelming that she didn't even take the time to properly read the contract before signing. That evening, Daniel went to see his mother in her room. Her condition had worsened. She immediately spoke as if she had already been waiting for him. "I want you two to get married tomorrow, Daniel." "But Mom, why rush things so much?" "We need preparations to have a wedding, Mom. I think tomorrow is too soon." "My son, I know all this seems rushed, but I don't know when I will leave. I could die at any moment, and I really want to see you get married while I'm still alive. Do it for me, my son." Once again, Daniel had to fulfill his mother's will. He didn't want to see her suffer. He went to City Hall that very night. Being a wealthy man, he managed to arrange an urgent wedding for the next day. Returning from City Hall, he took Stella to urgently finish the last shopping for the wedding preparations. Mrs. Charlotte helped Stella choose a wedding dress. The next day, Daniel put on his wedding jacket and went to City Hall with Stella. The wedding was celebrated in the presence of a few prestigious guests. Mrs. Charlotte, who was now in a wheelchair, was overwhelmed and cried with joy. She was very happy to have managed to unite them. She knew Stella was the perfect woman for her son. "He will eventually understand that I made the best choice for him," she thought to herself. A few days after the wedding, Mrs. Charlotte noticed that Stella kept spending her nights in her personal room. She called her to explain that she should join her husband in his room. "You are now my son's wife, Stella. You have to forget your old habits. Take your things and go settle in your husband's room. Take care of him and make sure to personally cook for him." As for Daniel, he wasn't at all enthusiastic about the idea that Stella now had to sleep with him. He still hadn't accepted having married a maid. Stella went to put her belongings in Daniel's room, but he acted as if she didn't exist and didn't talk to her. A week later, Daniel was working at the office when he received a phone call. It was Stella. "Mom had a seizure and I just took her to the hospital," she announced. "She's in serious condition." Daniel stood up and quickly ran to his car. He drove at full speed and went to the hospital. Upon arrival, the doctor told him that his mother would die in the next few minutes if no kidney was found for her. Daniel was distraught. He had already contacted all the hospitals in the country, but none of them had a compatible kidney for his mother. The only person he had found lived in a poor neighborhood very far away, several kilometers from the hospital. She was the only person who had a compatible kidney with his mother. She was an old lady, but she was demanding an exaggerated amount of money from Daniel just for one kidney, and Daniel had initially given up on her to look for other solutions. Now that he had no other solution, and knowing his mother would die in a few minutes if he did nothing, he called the lady back, crying. "Hello, Mom. I beg you, please come right away to Medora Hospital. I will pay you the amount you asked for. My mother will die in a few minutes if you don't come. I beg you." The old lady agreed and immediately left the house to go to the hospital. Daniel's face was flooded with tears. He knew that the chances of his mother surviving were very slim because the donor lived in a place that was too far from the hospital. Stella was also inconsolable. Mrs. Charlotte called Daniel to speak to him one last time. "My son, it is obvious that I am about to die. Before I go, I want you to promise me that you will take care of Stella and never make her cry." Not wanting to make such a promise to his mother, Daniel quickly changed the subject. Stop talking and rest while waiting for the donor to arrive, Mom. You risk getting more tired. 30 minutes later, the kidney donor still hadn't arrived, and unfortunately, it was too late. Mrs. Charlotte closed her eyes for the last time. Daniel was inconsolable. Overwhelmed by the news, Stella had a seizure and collapsed to the ground. The doctors present quickly took her in for emergency care. She didn't wake up until 2 hours later and continued to cry. Since she had left prison, Mrs. Charlotte was the only person she had left. She was like a mother to her. She had learned to live and share everything with her. What was her life going to look like now? Meanwhile, the doctor who had treated her during her seizure called Daniel into his office. "We ran several tests on your wife, sir. You need to make sure she gets a lot of rest. You really need to watch over her and take care of her for the healthy development of your baby." "What? A baby?" asked Daniel, looking shocked. Yes, sir. You didn't know your wife was pregnant." The news hit Daniel like a bullet. The pain he felt from his mother's death turned into deep anger. "I never trusted that girl. I always suspected she just looked innocent but wasn't really. Carrying another man's baby while living in my house as my wife. I knew it, Mom, but you didn't believe me." He was red with rage. He got into his car and left the hospital without even waiting for Stella. A few hours later, the doctor gave Stella permission to go home. As soon as she entered the living room, Daniel was already standing there waiting for her. "I'm really disgusted by you, Stella. I don't want to see you in my house anymore. I'll give you some money so you can go far away from my house with your child. I will never marry a whore. You are truly mean and shameless. So you wanted to pin a child that's not mine on me. Luckily, I never touched you." Stella was confused by Daniel's words. Until then, she still didn't know she was pregnant. "But what child are you talking about, Daniel? Are you kidding me?" "No, Daniel, I don't even know what you're talking about." He threw the test papers at her face, looking furious. "Well, read for yourself what it says." She picked up the papers, and after reading them, she realized she was indeed pregnant. She started crying. "Who is the father of your child?" asked Daniel. Stella was unable to answer. "I thought you were someone trustworthy. I was starting to develop feelings for you. I almost gave you a chance while you were sleeping with multiple people, to the point of not even knowing the father of your child. If I'm lying, then give me the name of the father of your child." Stella was unable to answer. She endured Daniel's violent and hurtful words. Her face was covered in tears. Daniel handed her a divorce paper, and she was forced to sign. He threw her out of his house. She was lost. What would become of her life? Where would she go knowing she had no one left, and that her own father and younger sister had rejected her? Everything that was happening to her was her father's fault, and that made it even more painful. If only she knew the person who had taken her virginity that day, she could have gone to him, but she knew nothing about him. She got up and went to Mrs. Charlotte's grave. She cried for hours. Having nowhere to sleep, she stayed on the grave for 3 days despite the cold. After those 3 days spent sleeping under the open sky, she eventually found an unfinished building not far from the cemetery and settled there. She prayed every day and asked God to help her. One evening, Daniel was at home and lost in thought. A heavy rain was falling, and despite his anger, he began to worry that Stella might not have a place to sleep. He began to remember how she had taken care of his mother when she was in prison. Without Stella, his mother might have died much earlier. He started to question himself. I should never have thrown that girl out, especially since she's pregnant. I acted out of anger. If something happened to her, I would be the only one responsible. He got into his car that same night despite the rain and went looking for her. He went straight to his mother's grave because he suspected she would certainly have gone there. Unfortunately, she was no longer there. He approached the cemetery caretaker to ask him. The caretaker explained that Stella had stayed on the grave for 3 days before going to the unfinished building behind the cemetery. He quickly got into his car and headed toward the unfinished building. He saw her inside the building in a very sad state. He entered the building. "Come with me to the house. You can't stay alone in this place. It's dangerous. I don't want to come with you. I would rather die here," she said, crying. Daniel forcibly pulled her into the car and brought her home. 7 months later, Grace was already fully prepared for her wedding. It was her lifelong dream to marry a rich man. "I will never have to work again in my life." She was overjoyed. One Saturday morning, she visited Daniel at his house and was surprised to see Stella working in the house. The detail that didn't escape her was that she was pregnant. She left the house looking confused and immediately went home to inform her father. Shocked by the news, Mr. Johnson took his car and immediately went to Daniel's house. He saw Stella in the yard and asked her, "But what are you doing in this house? And who got you pregnant?" Stella began to cry. "You are the only one responsible for everything that is happening to me. I will never forgive you for everything you did to me. You asked me to have sexual relations with a man to help me get out of prison. As soon as I did what you asked, you never came back to see me. That man is the father of the baby I'm carrying, and I don't even know his face. You destroyed my life." Mr. Johnson was shocked. He understood that Daniel was the father of her child. In fact, Daniel was the man who had slept with Stella. He was also the business partner Mr. Johnson had talked to Stella about in prison, and he was the same man meant to marry his daughter Grace. Not knowing what to say, he took his car and went home and explained the whole situation to his daughter. Together, they decided to quickly plan Grace's wedding before Daniel found out that Stella was carrying his child. A few weeks later, Stella went into labor and was quickly taken to the hospital. She gave birth to a baby girl whom she named Charlotte in honor of Mrs. Charlotte, who had done everything for her. When she returned home after giving birth, Daniel couldn't stop looking at the child. He found her very beautiful and spent hours by her crib, even ending up being late for work. He was very attached to the child without ever knowing why. Every time he came home from work, he always brought her a gift and played with her. Stella was very sad every time she saw him playing with her child. She so badly wanted to know the father of her child. A few days later, Grace decided to visit Daniel to tell him the date her father had chosen for their wedding. When she arrived, she realized that Stella had already given birth. Daniel was so busy playing with the child that he didn't have time to welcome Grace. Grace left the house in tears and returned home. A few minutes after she left, Daniel realized that he had not welcomed her as he should have. He had been so busy playing with the baby that he had completely neglected Grace. He decided to go to her house to apologize for his behavior. Upon his arrival at Mr. Johnson's house, as he was about to enter the living room, he heard whispers. It was Mr. Johnson and his daughter talking. He pressed his ear against the door to listen to them. "Dad, I don't know what to do anymore. We must act quickly before it's too late. I saw Daniel, and he is very close to Stella's daughter. I'm afraid he will completely distance himself from me if he ever finds out that the little girl is his daughter. Daniel was troubled by what he was hearing. The little girl? My daughter? He was asking himself tons of questions when he heard Grace continue speaking while crying. It's all your fault, Dad. You should never have sent Stella that night. If you had just found another girl in the street, we wouldn't be here today. How can you act like that without thinking about the consequences? You ruined everything. All the information was now very clear in Daniel's mind. Stella was the girl he had slept with the other night. So he was the father of Stella's baby. Completely stunned by everything he had just heard, he headed to his car. While he was driving, his mind was troubled. He felt guilty for having taken advantage of Stella and for having unjustly insulted and belittled her when he was the cause of all the suffering she was going through. At the same time, he was happy to know that he was the real father of little Natalie, whom he loved so much. When he arrived home, he went straight to Stella's room to ask her questions. I want you to give me serious explanations, Stella. Since you arrived in this house, I have never seen anyone visit you, and you have almost never left the house. How can you explain then that you became pregnant? I really need to understand. It was at that moment that Stella decided to explain everything to him. When I was still in prison, my father told me he would only help me get out if I slept with a rich businessman. I refused because I was a virgin, but he forced me to do it. The night of the act, I couldn't see the face of the person who took my virginity because the room was very dark. Unfortunately, my father never kept his promise, and I would still be in prison today if your mother and you hadn't helped me. I understand, replied Daniel. Now, can you explain to me why you went to prison? I went to prison to replace my little sister Grace, who had been arrested in a nightclub banned in our city. After Stella's explanations, Daniel felt even more guilty. He went to his room. All night he couldn't fall asleep. He was lost and didn't know exactly what to do anymore. Very early the next morning, he woke up, and without Stella knowing, he took a sample of the child's hair and went to the hospital to do a DNA test. After the analyses, the doctor confirmed to him that he was indeed the father of the baby. Everything was clear. Stella hadn't lied. The child was indeed his. He took his car and went home. He asked Stella if she wanted to be his wife again. I am truly sorry for all the bad treatment I inflicted on you, Stella. I want you to forgive me and become my wife again, and I promise to change. Until then, Stella still didn't know that Daniel was the father of her daughter. I'm sorry, Daniel, but I don't want to be with you anymore. I'm really sorry, she replied to him. Without asking for her opinion, Daniel pulled her toward him with a sudden and abrupt gesture and kissed her tenderly. Stella couldn't resist him. She had always loved Daniel. Even though she preferred to keep her distance after everything that had happened, she hadn't had the strength to resist that kiss. That same evening, Daniel came back to Stella's room. He knelt down and began to beg her. I beg you, Stella, give me a second chance. I promise you I will change. I love you, Stella. Since Stella wasn't giving him any response, he started to cry. Stella's heart broke. She had never seen him in that state. Always having been a kind-hearted girl, she agreed to forgive him. Daniel was overwhelmed with joy and kissed her. The next morning, Daniel went to City Hall to schedule a new wedding. A week later, the wedding was celebrated, and this time Daniel invited many prominent figures and his high-ranking friends. Very quickly, since it was no longer a secret wedding this time, Mr. Johnson and his daughter were informed of the news. Daniel got married to Stella. Furious and disappointed by this betrayal, Mr. Johnson hurried to Daniel's house. "I'm really disappointed in your behavior, Daniel. How could you betray my trust in such a way? You had promised to marry my daughter Grace, and we had already planned the wedding. And now you allowed yourself to marry her sister Stella. You have betrayed both me and my daughter Grace. You are a horrible person." "Oh, really? I'm a horrible person? And what about you? Did you think your scheming would never come to light one day? Aren't you ashamed of behaving like a tramp with your own daughter and using her like merchandise? When your daughter Grace came to see me the other day, I was busy playing with Stella's baby, so I couldn't give her my attention. When she left, I decided to come to your house to apologize to her. When I got to your door, I heard your entire conversation. I now know everything you plotted behind my back and against me. I now know that I am the father of Stella's child." Stella was sitting in the room and overheard the argument between her father and Daniel. She was shocked to learn that Daniel was the father of her child. She laid her baby on the bed, rushed out of the room and asked her father, "Dad, tell me that everything I'm hearing is false. So it was to Daniel's house that you sent me the other night?" Mr. Johnson was unable to say a single word. He was covered in shame and lowered his head. "Let me explain everything to you, Stella. In fact, Daniel was furious. He ordered Mr. Johnson to leave his house. Mr. Johnson left the house with a feeling of humiliation. As he exited the house, Stella turned to Daniel crying. "So you knew about all this, Daniel? Why didn't you tell me even though you knew I needed to know who the father of my baby was?" Daniel got down on his knees in front of her. "I'm truly sorry, darling. I only got this information very recently, and I felt incredibly guilty about bringing it up. I felt so guilty because you've suffered a lot because of me. I want you to find a place in your heart to forgive me and give me a chance to make up for this mistake." Stella knew she had no choice. She had to forgive him. After all, he was her first love. He was the father of her child, and he had admitted his mistakes. Everyone deserves a second chance. She forgave him, and the two embraced each other. From that day on, Daniel did everything he could to regain Stella's trust. He was always attentive to her. He gave her many gifts and made sure she never lacked anything. He was very happy to have found the woman he needed in his life, that woman who was very patient. My mother was right after all. I hope you're proud of me from where you are, Mom. Disappointed by Mr. Johnson's behavior, Daniel decided to withdraw all his investments from his company, even though he was the biggest investor. The company went bankrupt and was shut down. Mr. Johnson ended up on the street. He had sold his last belongings to pay back his employees and had lost everything. He eventually ended up working for an old lady in town, trimming her flowers. His daughter Grace, who had been used to recklessly spending her father's money, ended up working as a prostitute in a city bar to survive. Daniel and Stella lived happily ever after with their little daughter Charlotte, who proudly carried her name. Learn to cultivate humility, regardless of the extent of your wealth. One must never dim someone else's light in order to shine brighter. Our parents will always be one step ahead of us. Let's listen to their advice with wisdom. Prayer is a powerful force that supports us through life's trials. If this story touched you, don't hesitate to leave an encouraging word in the comments and subscribe to my channel to support me.